I'm recording. I'll cut this part out.
Okay, I think we're going to get started. Good evening and welcome to Roundabout. My name is Cassie and as the owner of Roundabout Books, I'm so grateful you're here. I'm going to talk just a little bit extra longer tonight to recap some of our other conversations, so please bear with me. Before we move forward, please join me in acknowledging the land we are using today. We acknowledge that our bookstore resides on the ancestral, unceded land of the Confederate tribes of Warm Springs. In our neighboring area, we are also on the unceded lands of the Confederated tribes of the Siletz Indians and the tribes of the Grand Ronde. We encourage everyone to learn more about the land we occupy and the story of its peoples. We return together tonight for our last conversation in the 2023 Community Conversation Series presented in partnership between Family Kitchen and Roundabout Books. In A New Earth, Eckhart Tolle wrote, "Awareness is the greatest agent of change." It's very natural, I think, to look at poverty as an insurmountable problem, an unavoidable part of American life. It's tied to a dozen other complex issues, including, but not limited to, houselessness, healthcare, addiction, education, childcare, affordable housing, segregation, banking, employment laws, public policy, social policy, and more. It's easy to give up because we don't know how to start when you can't fix one thing without addressing a dozen others. But the people in this room have started, and we started with a conversation, and at the very least, that conversation brings greater awareness and shared knowledge. And it might not seem like much tonight, but by being here and by participating in the last 5 conversations, which so many of you have, you've already started the process. So thank you, all of you. We've learned a lot together this summer. I'm going to recap just quickly a few things that stood out to me before we start. From our discussion on food insecurity, I learned that everyone using food resources, out of everyone using food resources, a third of them are children, a third are over 65, and of the last 40%, about 3/4 are working in some capacity. As more and more seniors access services the last week of the month when benefits start to run out. I learned that asking for help is very, very hard and that there's a lot of shame in food insecurity and that changing our language and the way we distribute it makes a huge difference. From our discussion on addiction and healthcare, I learned how vitally important it is to build a trusting relationship between the service providers and the community in need. If we want to change addiction patterns, ensure medicine is taken as prescribed, treat disease, injury, and other ailments, there must be a relationship in place to do so. And these relationships take a lot of time and they take a lot of money. There's not near enough beds in our community for detox sobering centers, for addiction recovery, for transitional shelter space. I learned that after someone's gone through the sobering process, we often have nowhere to put them but back on the street. From our discussion on childcare, I learned how dramatically low we are on open childcare slots for children with special needs, and for children with special needs, it's exponentially worse. Costs associated with running a childcare program make it hard to pay well enough to for providers to live in the area, much less for owners to keep the business going and staying in business. From our discussion on housing, I learned there are significant challenging barriers to going from unhoused to housed, like getting a license, a criminal record, a prior eviction, personal hygiene, transportation, resource education, or simply the lack of reliable communication, a place to charge your cell phone, are all barriers to transitioning into housing. We're facing a 3-year timeline where current funding expires, and this affects service providers, shelters, and many other resources. Zoning and land use laws limit shelter space and how we can provide resources on them. I learned that the biggest obstacle to affordable housing is cheap land. Tonight, our goal is to have one more conversation that synthesizes everything we've done this summer and explores ways we can take small steps towards a bigger goal and possibly coordinate some community action together. I've shared a handout with resources we've collected through the conversation series. It's up here on the front table. If you don't have one and want one right now, I'm happy to pass one out to you, or we'll have extra handouts at the end. Feel free to take notes or add more service providers you hear about tonight. And again, thank you for being here and being part of this. It's a huge step for all of us. Finally, I'm very happy to introduce tonight's conversation facilitator, Ruth Williamson. Ruth is a Buddhist chaplain working alongside our unhoused community in Bend, Oregon. She's also a leadership and life coach, a worship facilitator, and teacher of mindfulness and self-compassion. Ruth brings over 25 years of community service to Bend in this moment we share. give her a warm welcome.
All right. Does anybody want to show up? Good. So, welcome. Just curious, a show of hands, who has been here for some of the earlier conversations? Wow. That's wonderful. And who heard of it just in the last couple of days? One of our panelists. First of all, thank you. Thank you for investing your time, your curiosity, for caring. Thank you for caring. I just want to mention, I want to give a shout out actually to the bulletin and the source. And I'll tell you why. We just sent something to them like day before yesterday, and both responded quickly and put notices in the paper. I think the bulletin ran a short article that mentioned that I was going to be the speaker, but I'm really not. These guys are the speakers. But still, I was so impressed that they just responded like that, and I think that's a little bit of a measure, and so did the source too. I want to make sure and say they responded quickly because they care. You know, just like each of us here tonight. So this is an invitation really for us to change and expand our sense of identity from me to we. It's not just about me, not just about you, it's about us. Suffering is mine, no matter who is suffering. It's not just possible to change, it is necessary if we do. And I want to offer 4 simple steps to kind of contextualize the conversation that we're going to have tonight. I want you to believe that this matters, because it does. We start with gratitude. Okay? We start with gratitude for the land that we share with our indigenous neighbors, and Cassie, thank you for that acknowledgement. I think that really matters that we bring that home. We feel gratitude for the incredible scenic splendor that is part of our daily living here in Bend, Oregon. So close. We feel gratitude for our neighborhoods, for safety, and for the real benefits of raising our families or retiring in such a vibrant community. And from this place of gratitude, we can turn towards suffering. Most of us tend to ignore that we ignore suffering. Yet that's why you're here tonight. We have gathered, all of us, to know this moment intimately and well, to share in the common humanity of suffering, our own and others, and to imagine ways to work skillfully with this suffering. That brings us to the 3rd step, which is deep listening. Deep listening, suspending our personal biases and assumptions, and imagining new ways of engaging with each other. Together we can test novel ideas. We volunteer, we participate. We feel enlivened by our engagement. We simply begin. And finally, the 4th step, we integrate. We integrate the new ideas, the sparks, the ahas, the what-ifs, the possibility. We approach the intractable circumstances driving so many to the margins of our community in a very Bend way. It becomes part of the cultural narrative. It becomes a way of being that we can feel gratitude for in the same way that we are grateful for this land that hosts us. So tonight, we based the outtakes from our earlier conversations at Roundabout. And we've come up with these themes for our conversation this evening, and it is going to be a conversation. We're going to hear from each of our experts up here. They're going to speak to three buckets of challenge that we're facing as a community. The first one that has emerged is onlining housing solutions. Okay, safe parking and managed camps and villages are the fastest response to houselessness. There are successful models to borrow from, and there's structure for their operations. What we need is land and space, and honestly, less NIMBYism. So tonight I want to welcome Chris Kramer from Nativity Lutheran. He's over here with the collar on. And Nativity has hosted a safe parking program in response to urgent needs. Chris also drives the shower truck for Shepherd's House Ministries. And Rick Russell is joining us from Redmond, the Community Fellowship in Redmond. And theirs is the only safe parking program in Redmond. It was started in 2021, and now they're working on an affordable RV park. So both Chris and Rick are going to be able to speak from direct experience about what works, what doesn't work with safe parking as a response to being unhoused or precariously housed. The second bucket of our attention is going to be around civic engagement, and we have Councilor Blumen here to offer his perspective from the Bend City Council. In this moment, the loudest voices are those challenging proposed solutions. The arguments lean towards dehumanizing those experiencing houselessness or those who are precariously housed. What are ways that solution-oriented community members, each of us, how can we be supportive? So Councilor Boardman's going to offer some perspective on this. I just want to offer, since I got the microphone, that in my opinion, our city council has continuously imagined some very innovative ways to respond to our housing crises, fast-tracking hundreds of new homes and apartments and reconsidering barriers to entry, including timelines and fees, in ways that put affordable housing in reach of our fast-growing community. It's notable that council has tackled controversial issues like camping code and clearing camps with measure, with compassion, with rigor, and with grace. So thank you for making time for us tonight. Of course. And finally, we're going to talk about volunteerism from the expert and the co-host of this series on houselessness. Donna Burklow is the executive director of the Family Kitchen. The Family Kitchen generates nearly 15,000. They reported in the bulletin today, 13, but Donna tells me nearly 15,000 meals each month. Board Chair John Trachtenberg is with us also. And those meals are distributed through partner agencies and directly to diners in need of a warm and nourishing meal. Donna coordinates her own volunteer team, a couple of whom are here this evening as well. And she works with others, building community across Central Oregon, one meal, one smile at a time. Doesn't take a lot, but it does take a lot of volunteers. So, each expert will speak on these big themes: safe transitional housing, civic engagement, and volunteering. And after their brief remarks, we will share a rich dialogue, and I really hope you will lean into that and ask questions. How can we do this differently? How can we do this? How can we really own this moment in a way that shifts? We might not end homelessness, but we can make a significant impact in many, many lives. And I think that that matters. That's why we're here tonight. So So I'm going to start with Chris and Rick. Chris is over here, Rick's over here. Why don't we start over here? Would that be okay?
Sure.
And you've got a microphone. Wonderful. And then we'll come back around to you.
We've all been hanging around the city.
You want me to sit down?
No, I'm just saying.
I can't see everybody that way. I'm Chris. I'm the pastor at Nativity Lutheran Church. I don't usually wear a collar, except that I think people like to know what a pastor looks like. So I'm one of them. So I'm the pastor at Nativity. I have like 5 minutes, so someone watch me. Nativity's in Southeast Bend. It used to be the biggest building in that part of town, and now Caldera High School makes us look like a garden shed. It's right on our property line. Nativity has a long history of engagement with our community, particularly those that have been thrown under the bus and ignored. We started what became Bethlehem Inn. We started what became Backpacks for Bend. We are the Head Start preschool in our part of town, so there's 40 kids in our preschool every day during the school year and sometimes in the summer. We are the Neighbor Impact Oregon Food Bank for Southeast Bend. There's 50 to 60 families a week that are getting $300 worth of groceries from our fellowship hall at no cost as food assistance. We're also the only woodlot that we know of open to the public in Deschutes County, where we have 30 households during the heating season every single Saturday that come and pick up a load of firewood. That's just who we've always been. We're also a church, so I wear a collar so people know. But when I'm on an airplane, people ask, what do you do? And I don't usually say I'm a pastor because that would get me in trouble. Because I'll either hear a confession or they'll assume I'm about another version of being a pastor. So I'll say, I'm a nonprofit executive that takes care of the poor. Oh, that's nice. And then I can, depending on who I'm seated next to, I can stay hidden or I can, eventually they'll fish me out. Like, you're a pastor, aren't you? But talking tonight about safe parking, we are the first long-term safe parking site in Bend. When the COVID pandemic began and the lockdown happened, the city contacted me. We talked about relationships. I don't know if you heard that in the wings as we started. Donna Brooklow and I know each other from doing youth ministry over the last 10 years. We don't do youth ministry anymore together. She does Family Kitchen and I'm pastor. But she called me. Last time she called me, she said, hey, the shower truck isn't coming. How do we get the shower truck back? It was when the COVID lockdown happened and all the volunteers said we can't do it. And we got the shower truck relaunched, so I'm also a shower truck driver. And then, so when Donna calls, I already know there's going to be work. And Donna called and said, can Nativity, and we just doubled our parking lot because we're a growing church, can Nativity host safe parking? The city needs this. The rules just changed as a COVID emergency response. It's legal now. Could Nativity offer some space? We're not using our parking lot for anything right now except for our food pantry and our AA meetings because worship's not happening in the building during the pandemic. So I met with Shelley in the city and suddenly we had this partnership between the city and Nativity and an agency called REACH. REACH is case management for people who are living outside. I helped start REACH. REACH is run by Stacy, who used to work for the Methodist Church, who's one of our youth ministry partners, and it was clear Stacy needed to be her own nonprofit, and I sat on the team that helped create the nonprofit to create REACH, so I knew Stacy when we started talking. Relationship is huge if we're going to change the world. If we do it all on our own, we're just going to be angry and rant and write editorials, and that's unhelpful. I think you're going to probably talk about that. But when we have relationships with people who actually care, with whom we are friends, even if we don't agree on absolutely everything, goodness flows through those tubes. And so I already had a pre-existing relationship with some people I knew and trusted. So it was very easy for me to say, tell me more. And then they said, well, there's this program called Safe Parking. Eastmont Baptist Church hosted it over the summer. So we were in the fall of the first year of COVID. But Eastmont said we can only do it during the summer because we have a preschool and we can't have those people around our preschool kids. Our parents will fight that. Notice the language. Those people, our kids. Well, Nativity has a preschool. We have 40 kids in our preschool. They're poverty class kids. They're 50 to 60% Spanish-speaking kids. And the staff of that preschool is pretty much working poor. So I met with the leaders of the preschool, realizing that was going to be the talk point. Met with the leaders of the preschool, and they ran up the flagpole of Neighbor Impact, the largest nonprofit in Central Oregon, went through their whole legal teams, and they said, well, if you actually are already vetting people and you're making sure there's no pedophiles in the program, there couldn't be anyway legally, because they can't be within 500 feet of a school, and we're a school. So as long as you're vetting your people, and we already have a fence around our playground, it's great. We think it's a great idea, said our preschool directors and the parents. And Nativity has a long history of caring about these things, so Nativity thought it was a great idea. And so I met with Stacy and I met with Shelly from the city, and we decided we could do a limited small program. We had a huge parking lot. We could have put 30 trailers out there. But I thought the most important thing to do would be to model, like 1 minute left. Okay, so here's the Reader's Digest condensed version. For 4 years now, we're in our 4th year, we've had 4 to 5 households living on our property at the north end of our parking lot. During that time, I've gotten grant funding and volunteer support to build a privacy screen so the neighbors across the street don't have to look into the back of a trailer park, because that wasn't what they signed up for. That's the one complaint we've had. And so that neighbor that complained helped me build a fence with grant funding from a finance institution. We added electricity because it's hot in the summer and it's cold in the winter. We've added running water during the non-freezing months. And so we have a hospitable place for people who are transitioning from Hunnell Road or China Hat after they got run out of their apartment because they couldn't rent anymore, they couldn't afford it in bed. They've all been locals, every single one of them. There's like 25 to 30 we've had. I don't know the numbers exactly. But my sense is we're at about 25 households that have lived with us in 4 years. About 2/3 of them have moved into either transitional or permanent housing. 2/3. That's an ungodly high number. I should say that is a godly high number. That's what God wants to see. Most agencies don't do that, but it's predicated on we vet, and we care. Reach chooses who lives with us, and they choose people that can truly benefit and live in the community guidelines that wouldn't terrify our neighborhood. That's really important. We're not saving the whole houseless population. We're trusting Reach to pick people that could really benefit from what we can offer, and then Reach places them, and then Reach gets them back into their driver's licenses and their retirements and their Social Security, and then suddenly they have more sustainable income, and then connects them with affordable housing, and then pretty soon they moved out and another family's moved in. There's, I think, 5 households that moved in with us that now live back in the woods because turns out they weren't a good fit for living in community in peace. And Reach very artfully moved them back out with solar panels and water jugs. Meanwhile, at Nativity, there's a spigot outside my office that runs every afternoon from 4 to 6 with usually 5 to 8 battered vehicles with lots of spare parts hanging off of them, picking up water. I think we're supplying the drinking water to most of China has. I invited one woman to fill her water jugs there instead of stealing it from a business. And now we're taking care of the community. So anyway, we've been doing it. It works. You'll have a chance to ask questions later. Rick, what are you up to?
I'm Rick Russell, and I'm also a pastor at the Fellowship in Redmond. And we've been engaged with sheltering efforts for 7 or 8 years. I think the hardest decision for our team was probably 8 years ago when Shepherd's House approached us and said, hey, we're doing the winter shelter. You guys have a gym. What do you think? And there's a lot of hand-wringing and sanitation discussion and safety discussion and children. But we said yes, and it was off to the races. Volunteers started engaging, bringing meals, getting to know names and stories. And I could tell you that if I went to my church today and said, we're not doing the winter shelter anymore, they would tar and feather me. I mean, it's a love of the work that we do there. By the way, we're not doing the winter shelter anymore because Shepherd's House has now secured its own facility in Redmond that will be open for the first time this winter. So it's actually got a lot. And so that was a collaborative relationship. In 2021, we were aware of the safe parking model, and so we pursued an ordinance approval by the Redmond City Council, and they kicked in a little bit of money, that's the ARPA funds, if that sounds familiar to anybody, and some extra COVID-related federal dollars that trickled down, and said, go for it. And so we were the first safe parking site in Redmond. But we quickly went to work trying to recruit other sites. And God bless the VFW, Post 4109, and their willing hearts when a lot of other people were scared and thought, no, this isn't going to work. And they stepped up and committed a spot for veterans. And then it was, after that, the county allowed us use of some vacant piece of property that they owned. We had our first business come online, a gym, the Redmond Athletic Center, allows us to use their parking lot. neighbor impact. The city then later brought 2 vacant pieces of property, and I'm forgetting someone else in there. But so we now have 6 sites. Our 7th site will come online here in September, and then our 8th site probably October, and then we're also in conversations right now with both the fairgrounds and the community college, the Redmond campus, the community college by the airport, and have had ongoing discussions about perhaps this fall or winter. We'll see. In addition to that, we are working on an RV park project. A lot of folks fall into a vehicle because they lose their housing. In my experience, the number one reason that we hear from people of how they moved into a vehicle is traditionally, I should say traditionally, commonly, it's a relationship that ended. Sometimes because a spouse died, sometimes because partners split up, and they were sharing a housing unit, and then they go back out to go secure their own, and they don't realize that what they used to rent for $800 is now $1,800 or $2,400, and they just can't do it. There are other reasons, there are other stories, but I'd say relationships that end are the most common stories that we hear. So we're working on an affordable RV park that will be a lower rate than traditional. If you went to an RV park right now, you'd be paying minimum $700, but it quickly gets to $800 and even $900 a month for an RV spot. And if your RV is more than 10 years old, forget it. You probably aren't going to get into that. And we have a lot of folks who choose to move into RVs. 2 images I'll give you. One is a ladder. People don't just go from they're housed and doing well, and then all of a sudden they're living in a tent off of no dogs clearing their tent site. People descend through just the chaos compounds if you lose your housing, your stability, and sometimes there's a health crisis thrown in there. All sorts of things happen. And by the same token, people don't just go from the side of the road to a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and a 30-year mortgage. There are steps in between. And so if you think of a ladder, what we really have to think about is developing more rungs on that ladder where people can begin to ascend out of instability and towards stability. And safe parking is, the lower, so you've got unauthorized encampments, the lowest end of housing options, tents and unauthorized encampments with RVs and things. And then you've got things like winter shelters, and then you've got things like safe parking and the Second Street shelter and congregate sheltering. And then you begin to kind of, you can move up to things like housing vouchers and tools like that to get people into subsidized housing. But there are some missing rungs in between those places. And so we need to work on filling that out. Another image I would give you is of a garden hose. And I've got a garden hose that still works, and I'm too cheap to replace it, but every time we use it, it's got about 15 kinks in it when we unroll it. And that really is housing in Central Oregon. If we want to move people from unauthorized encampments toward stable housing options, it isn't just we need another shelter or just we need some more affordable housing or we need NeighborWorks to produce more apartments or something like that. These are kinks in the hose, and we have to undo every single one of them in order for people to be able to move, or else people get stuck. And I would say right now the number one bottleneck is we get a number of people into safe parking, and then our case managers get them signed up for working with Housing Works or other vouchers, things like that. And then there aren't places, those apartments just don't open up. And so they are kind of stuck right now. I'll tell you one story and be done and tell me if it's too long.
You're good.
Okay, one quick story. I'll tell you briefly the story of Kim. Kim came to us, she heard about us on the news, and she was working, single mom. She moved into a vehicle because she left a partner. It was not a healthy relationship. It was not safe for her to be there, for her child to be there. And so Kim left. She was working the entire time. She agreed to let the news interview her. We were very reluctant. She cautioned her that she may not want to do that, but she did it. And then the news reported that, said something to the effect that she had lost her job at one point, which was not true, and she was deeply offended. The news had reported that because she had been working this whole time. She is a cashier. She has shared custody of her daughter, who was 9, it was a year ago, so 10 right now. we were able to, she got an RV from a friend. We were able to, God bless those men and women at the VFW hall. She wasn't a veteran, which was their preference, but her dad was a veteran, so they let it slide. And so we moved her in, plugged her in, she had power, she had some access to water, she kept working throughout that. Our case managers worked with her, got her connected to Thrive, some other great partner organizations. She's now living in an apartment in Bend, something opened up for her. And Furnish Hope came in and helped provide furnishings for her, and our case managers do great work collaborating with all those other organizations. Sometimes somebody will say, well, I can't afford to live in Beverly Hills, so I moved, that's why I don't live there. If you can't afford to live in Bend, if you can't afford to live in Central Oregon, maybe you just need to go find another place to be. Well, what do you do when you have shared custody with a child? I mean, are we the kind of community that really is so driven by that perspective that we would suggest breaking up a family and a parent for their child? I can't live with that kind of approach to what we're talking about. The numbers are consistent, I know, really. 80%, anywhere between 79 and 84% consistently are the numbers we get back of the people who are unhoused in our community. Were here, they were our neighbors. They were residents of Redmond and Bend and Prineville and Sisters before they became unhoused. And there are all sorts of anecdotes out there. Well, I heard somebody, Measure 110 passed and they wanted to come here to do free drugs. I hear all those anecdotes all the time. But I can tell you for years we've been keeping statistics on this. And year after year they're the same. And we used to do sheltering in Jefferson County as well. They were the same in Jefferson County. Anywhere between, in Pitt County it was 79% this year. The numbers we've been keeping tend to be 82, 83, 84%. The people who are unhoused here were living here, working here, part of our community before they became unhoused. People did not choose to move here and to choose to move here to become unhoused. And so I think we have some obligation as a community to provide those rungs on the ladder. And safe parking is one of those tools that we have.
Hi everybody, Anthony Broadman, one of your Bend City Councilors. Hi Diane, it's good to see some faces I know. If you live in Bend, I am your City Councilor. And when I say I am your City Councilor, I am the City Councilor of all of the people living in Bend, whether you are housed or unhoused, or one of the hundreds of children in Bend La Pine schools in Bend who are housing insecure or homeless, do not have a house to live in tonight. It makes my job, and I'm talking about civic engagement, so the greatest part about City Council is that once every 4 years, we choose one of us to sit in one of these seats and do everything we can to serve the community. And it makes the job, in my mind, really easy, because I get to ask questions, I get to seek solutions with curiosity and humility, and learn from the experts in this space who actually know what works. And we know what works. We have data that shows what works. Safe parking works. Outdoor shelters with services work. Permanent supportive housing for folks who are never ever going to be able to live on their own works. Unmanaged encampments in our city do not work. They are unsafe. The answer to that is not simply to arrest people or somehow make people's lives so unpleasant that in this la-la land they're going to leave the town where they grew up and move somewhere else. That's not a solution to homelessness. Civic engagement in my lifetime as a public servant, which has been very brief, my day job, I'm a lawyer. Civic engagement, I believe, has gotten more difficult. I can't tell you how many articles people send me from next door, which is uniquely inadequate for sharing educated opinions like the folks that I have the honor of sitting with up here. Amen. Yeah, and that's just that's one example of a bunch of really poor tools that we've developed as a community to talk to each other. So what works for civic engagement? I do not pretend to be an expert. All I am is a guy who gets to leave my law office and have the honor of serving you in city council every 2 weeks in a meeting. But I have seen what works. What works is educated input from the experts up here with data to the community, and that's what I've seen. That's the only thing I've seen change hearts and minds. We are living in extremely polarized times. That's a big duh, right? The polls of housing insecurity, I don't even want to call it homelessness, because it's our housing crisis here right now, which is largely a function of our housing costs. The polls of this are so far apart between people, and I would even include some elected colleagues in this, who believe that homelessness is purely a moral failing, and that the only way to cure it is by making people's lives so miserable that they leave your community. And that is, at its core, inconsistent with my personal spiritual beliefs, inconsistent with my morality and ethics. And it's a very difficult pole to bring back towards the middle. I will be honest, I don't think those are the loudest people in the room. The loudest people in the room are the folks on the other side, who believe that any regulation of people experiencing homelessness is somehow cruel or illegal or unconstitutional. In Oregon, those are the loudest people in the room. And we know that under federal jurisprudence, in our hearts, that with the right to a place to sleep, a place to be housed, a place to call your own, come some responsibilities. And those can be very difficult conversations to have with people who are having the worst day of their lives. But we have to recognize that 99% of us are living between those two poles. I really believe that. Call it 90, whatever it is. We live in a space where we all acknowledge that we have a housing crisis that is driving people to live in unsafe circumstances. But the vast majority of us recognize that, and recognize that as a society, we have to have rules so that we can live together and we can take care of each other, and kids can be safe, and elders can be safe, medically fragile people can be safe. And I think what has worked, and again, in my very short time in public service, is modeling success, showing what works, and putting your head down. Sometimes you will fail, and you cannot plan for 100% success. You can't plan for no failure. Let's talk about the fits and starts we've had in this community with outdoor shelters. There was a proposed outdoor shelter on 9th Street. We failed, and the people can have different versions of this, so I'll just give this as an analogy. We failed to find a service provider there because of the community outrage about having what was then proposed to be medically fragile and older women staying in a outdoor shelter. I don't like to use the term managed camp because I don't think it's really accurate. We weren't able to open that. That's city property. Juniper Ridge, we've encountered significant barriers to opening an outdoor shelter in Juniper Ridge, again, largely because of resistance from neighbors, and I don't blame service providers for not wanting to open up a shelter in an environment where your neighbors think that you're holding some sort of festival of crime. That is not a conducive place to open up places for people to live. And then I'll talk about a success, which was driven by, and there's a board member here tonight, driven by Central Oregon Villages behind Desert Streams over on 27th. A ton of resistance to that. In fact, friends who I go to church with were asking me, what should I do? This really scares me. It really scares me that they're going to have this shelter there. And I said, go talk to our former chief of police, who's on the board of this entity. Do your own research, which can be treacherous, but do your own research about what really works. Because if you rely on what we know works from a data standpoint, it really helps people not just feel okay with the outdoor shelter that's moving in behind their house, but it turns them into a champion. And that's what we started to see when Central Oregon Villages went door to door, explaining to people exactly what was going to occur. Did it alleviate all of the resistance to it? No, we had a ton of business resistance to this facility. But at the end of the day, it takes guts that this community is going to stop listening to the polls on either side at some point, and just have the political courage to move forward with projects that we know that work. I think a few tools in terms of civic engagement have lent to a more cooperative spirit in this community. One is something I'm really proud of that we did right after being elected, was the coordinated houselessness response office, which we set up to really, the hope is to prevent this constant passing of the buck between county and city, police, and everybody else. You folks don't want to see us blaming each other. You want solutions. We all want solutions. I want solutions. That's the goal of the CHRO. I'm not going to stand up and say mission accomplished today, but that's a huge civic engagement tool that I'm very hopeful will lead to us flattening the curve of growth in homelessness. The other two issues, the other two tools that I think have worked really well is a new tool by council. We used it during the camping code. It doesn't have an exciting name, it's just a round table. But it allows us to have public meetings with members of the community. So you can all sit around the table with us and we can talk about what does it mean to regulate how long somebody can camp somewhere? What does it mean for the house community right there? What does it mean for the unhoused community if they have to pick up and move? And then the final example is something that we don't use yet, but I want to put a bug in your ear for something called civic assemblies. This has been used in Ireland regarding same-sex marriage. It's been used in France regarding the end-of-life decisions. And I describe it essentially as jury duty for public engagement, jury duty for public policy. And I think we're at a point right now in our polarized world where rather than setting back and having our decision makers be in a star chamber where we don't understand what's happening, we all need to lean in more. It can't just be city council, county commission making decisions in a vacuum. We need more civic engagement. It's really easy to close the door when people get angry at you. I don't blame elected leaders who do that. I personally think we need to take the opposite approach. We need to throw open the doors of government to more people. And civic assemblies, this kind of concept of jury duty for everybody, where we get 20, 30, 40 experts in the room once a month for a year to talk about the really tough issues, whether it's air pollution or homelessness or anything else. I think it's a really valuable tool that we should explore as we do.
Okay, I get to talk about volunteerism. And I think I'm going to take a little different tack on it to start. I've just been sitting here and thinking, and tell you what, so I run a nonprofit that provides free meals to anybody who needs them. And we're doing it every day, and you heard the numbers, it's big, it's 500 or so meals a day that we're providing. And so here's the thing, what if I say, I don't need any volunteers, right? Some things actually get a little bit better, I'm gonna say, just bear with me. I would have some predictability about, how things are gonna get done. I would be able to, know that everything in the kitchen was in its same place where I put it, the day before. I would know that, safe food handling practices, if somebody wasn't doing it right, I could fire them and, hire the next person. So, there's some potential upsides to this if I don't have volunteers. And it costs a lot, because we know the wages here need to be, livable wages, right? So I would have to hire quite a large number of people, but that's just money. We seem to find it, when we need it, apparently. I don't know. We can throw money at things, right? So I'm thinking, well, write a few more grants, hire the staff, make things more predictable. But what would we lose out on? And this is the biggie. And it's not what I would lose out on, right? I've just given some kind of interesting points that sound kind of tempting to me with this predictability and an ability to, know what's going on. But what would we lose out on if I didn't have 400 people each month coming through, making meals, serving meals, cleaning up after the meals, and engaging with all those people we're providing meals to? What would we as a community lose out on? And you'd lose out on that visibility into another life. A lot of other lives. And that is something we can't afford. We can't afford to lose out on that, period. So then you take what my organization does and then multiply it by a lot of other organizations and a lot of other looks at things, So ours is food insecurity, and we're working towards eliminating food insecurity. Do it as we can. Meanwhile, we're going to provide food. But then there's the folks that go out and provide veterinary care for houseless individuals who have companion animals. So, that whole world, that's a whole nother world. And that's actually going out and gaining the trust that we've talked about of the folks whose animals we're serving. And that's another engagement of a much deeper source, really, because it's not transactional. We've got to earn the trust first. This is their animal, this is their person in a way. So there's that. There's, CASA. CASA has, court-appointed special advocates. That's the life of a child who has nobody in their corner. And what does that even look like? How is it that that's even possible, right? So if, think of all this exposure that we all would lose out on. So it's not worth it for, even if I found the money, even if we all found the money and we all just funded all of these services, it's not worth it, because then we would all be living in a bubble. We wouldn't like it, I promise you, in the end of this. So volunteerism. So in my world, volunteers who find a match for their passions, their skills, their time, are the volunteers that love being where they are. They're the volunteers that last the longest. They don't burn out. And those are very big things for any of us trying to operate with a volunteer staff, so to speak. So I urge you, probably all, in fact, how many people volunteer? Just anyway. Okay, how many people have experienced burnout in your volunteering? Come on, be honest. If you examine that, a lot of that probably came from you're volunteering somewhere where the fit wasn't there. I'm just going to venture a guess. And that's okay. That gave you a really good insight to, this is not my thing. But let's say your thing is, I've got a woman who's volunteering for us, who she just came out and said one day, she goes, Donna, you guys need an inventory spreadsheet. And I'm like, that's an interesting idea. Never thought about it. Okay, sure. She goes, no, really, you need an inventory. I am an Excel spreadsheet nerd, and I want to make you an inventory spreadsheet. It's going to take a while, I get it, but it's going to have everything that you buy and every store that you buy it from and what kind of quantity you get. And I'm like, wow, this is so awesome. Never even thought about it. She is now so engaged in volunteering for us because she saw, a niche. It's a thing that she loves to do, and she will probably, come up with the next spreadsheet here shortly, and not know I needed it, and then find out that I really did. So it's finding the passion, it's finding the place that fits your passion, finding the place. I want to point out something too that it's kind of a little sidetrack, but bear with me. Sometimes we have the passion and we make the assumption that the place doesn't exist. And we found this a lot in COVID, I have to say. There was a lot of sudden awareness of suffering, so thank you, COVID, for providing awareness of suffering, I guess, but a lot of that came with, oh, people are hungry. I must go make food and take it down to the street corner and provide it. Without ever looking to see, is there a place that already provides food and maybe I could help them? This came up a lot, so I do caution you, let's look at your passions. Take the extra couple of steps to see if there is an organization that is already providing what you're passionate to provide, and in a way that you feel, I mean, obviously there needs to be that match too. It needs to match your vision of how it can be provided. And then go ahead and do some matching up, right? And I promise that once you do that and you give it a try and you expose yourself to what is going on, the suffering that we see, the frustrations that we see, the gaps that we see, you will be changed, and you will also, as you've already discovered, so many of you, you will also have much more of a platform to then go and encourage others to do the same. And that, I think, is where we can get to some of this NIMBYism. You know, once you've been seen and thoroughly are immersed in what's going on, your ability to help kind of tone down the NIMBYism and maybe tone up the YIMBYism will be that much more powerful. And it'll be so because you will have been in it with some folks. So thank you to those that do volunteer. For those that it's a little bit nervous, it's okay, try a little bit, be a spreadsheet nerd for somebody. There's always at least, you know, the tiniest of things that make a huge difference on the part of a nonprofit, I can promise you that. So thank you to all that already do, and I am going to be happy to answer any questions about volunteerism.
Okay, thank you so much. It was pretty wonderful to hear from each of you, and thank you for your leadership in these complicated and complex situations. So we want to open it up to your questions, your comments. I really want to encourage everybody to lean in, if you will, to take a risk, even if it's not your natural inclination to ask a question that you might not have know an easy answer to. This is that opportunity. Again, we've kind of identified throughout the series these three big buckets: safe parking, transitional housing, managed camps. Love to hear some questions, comments, and concerns around that. Civic engagement, I think Councilor Boardman offered some really great ideas. I was aware of the roundtable conversations that you hosted, but the other model I think is particularly interesting. And I'm also kind of, you know, what struck me was just the tone of civic engagement of conversation, because we're all in a country where we invite this dialogue. We want to hear from everybody, but I think the tone and tenor of our conversations could be considered also. And finally, just this idea of engagement. We will pass out, Cassie mentioned this earlier, a list of agencies in our region where you can plug in, where you can match your time, your talents, your interests. But I think Donna hits on a really important point too, when she talks about how we are changed as volunteers in the course of engaging around the things that we care about. Suffering is ours. These are our neighbors, as Rick makes the point. This is our place. And I think there's tremendous promise in this community and in this region. It's always been defined in that way. So, let's hear from some of you. curious about. You can stand up. Julie's got a mic. Thank you, sir.
Roger Johnson, was it Stacy? I
No,
didn't remember.
Ruth.
Ruth,
Yeah.
okay, I missed it. So, I'm sorry.
Nice to see you.
Chris, thank you for your comments, very much appreciated. Rick, Donna, and Anthony, I think all of you kind of are putting in the fabric of what we're all trying to put together. So, all my great-grandparents homesteaded in Oregon, so I have a vested interest. I grew up about 90 miles north of here on the homestead, and was fortunate to attend Gonzaga University, a psychology major. I served in the 101st Airborne Division in Vietnam and saw combat, and we saw a lot of homelessness. And when you have people that are just absolutely taken away from their homes forcefully, it's very impactful. It's something that you never forget. These wonderful families down on the river during the fires a couple of years ago that were burned out of homes, they don't have insurance, they're homeless. So I decided I was going to learn a little bit about the problem. In the last 10 years, Portland has spent $1 billion on homelessness, and it's worse than it was 10 years ago. They have accomplished very, very little. And I went out and interviewed people on Hummel Road and other areas and asked these individuals how they got there, what they would like and what would help them. There was not one of them that wanted to be there. That was obvious. And so then I started doing research about different countries, what they'd done. In Amsterdam, in Saudi Arabia, in Denmark. And I found that the Saudis handle 3 million people in Ramadan in camps a year. They also have 500,000 Yemen refugees from war that they have housed in camps. And we're talking about 12, 15, 2,400, whatever the number here locally is. So let's talk about solutions. And I've given this a lot of thought. I've looked at what the Dutch have done and the Danes and what's been successful. So their model was they decided to get together collectively as a community and come to solutions. And what they decided to do were to develop dignity camps. And these dignity camps are different types of camps for different people that have different problems. Women and children, kids need to go to school. Most of them work. You've got people that were born with addiction problems. You have people that are retarded. You have all, we know what all they are. And we have men that came from war, and they couldn't somehow put their act together after they got back. And as you know, in the military, you have the highest rate of suicide in any place in the world, the U.S. military. So what I came up with is, and I appreciate your thoughts on this because I was trying to listen to how you and Brendan put out the different areas for the trailers or whatever. So the idea of the dignity camp is to have a turnkey camp. The Oregon State National Guard, which we pay taxes for, uses their technology and their ability to put together training camps during the summertime for soldiers. I was one of those, so I know how it works. You can take a battalion of 450 men and on a weekend have a camping place. This is not complicated, they're trained to do it. The National Guard has ability to set out, for example, paving areas. They can pave it on a weekend. If you have gone to Hood River and you've ever gone by Little John's State Park, they have wonderful outdoor facilities for people from the city so they can go out in the country. And they have a place to go to the restroom. Now, it's not the most beautiful, but they like to do that. That's part of their camping experience. And so we have a camp where you have mentally retired or alcoholics or whatever the issues are. We have the ability and the skills and the trained people to put out very tasteful and comfortable mobile homes that can be put on to the site to be there for counseling if it's needed. We can have facilities to bring children, bring individuals into the community wherever they need the services for education, for medical, for dental, whatever it is. And we have the transportation facilities available. And if we use the county and city property, which we're all taxpayers of, and we can put these camps on this, we don't have to buy it, there isn't any money involved. If you think about Mongolia, and the Mongolian people who have lived in yurts for thousands of years, and they live there comfortably and successfully and happily. And yurts are very inexpensive. My neighbor has a yurt house that she lived in for a year while her home was being built. It's a very nice, comfortable thing. There's nothing wrong with it. And these yurts are very inexpensive, and they be put up in a day. Anyway, so there are solutions if we have the will and the political desire to do it. The models are in place. So I thought we got the governor, the head of the National Guard, the mayors of the different areas in the county here, and the county representatives, individuals from the community that are working in this area together, form a steering committee, and then set up a structured program to do this. I think we can do this and be a model for the rest of the country, because this is systemic throughout the United States. It's just not going to happen here. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Okay, that's what we're talking about. That's a fresh idea. That's a fresh approach, and it's an engagement that I think we've seen fits and starts around. That I really appreciate that, Roger. Julie, we had another.
Do we have? Because if you don't, I do.
Oh,
I always have questions. Wait. Oh, yeah.
And I'm sorry, I missed your name.
Roger Johnson.
Thank you. I was thinking about what is it that prevents us from doing larger scale sheltering projects in this community. This is just off the kind of top of my head from my perspective. So I wrote down 4 things. Land use, significant challenge. Unfortunately, I went to, I got a master's degree in divinity. Not very helpful when it comes to land use issues, and it comes up constantly. The limitations of where we can place sheltering types of facilities, and that's something that I and even our local folks don't really, our local elected folks don't really have any power over. The governor and the legislature are talking about that big problem. And I'm not trying to shoot down what you said. I'm just trying to address that these are the challenges that we have. Yeah, we have to be able to navigate these. The other is funding, that there just is not, these projects all take money. And ARPA, American Rescue Plan, so that was federal COVID dollars that, again, trickled down from the federal government to county, city, state, was very helpful in propping up a whole bunch of new initiatives in the last 3 years. But those funds are drying up, and it's really, and I admire what the new governor has done and the recent allocation of something like $200 million. But those were all for new initiatives. And so what we've gotten is 2 big rounds of money for new initiatives, but no real funding mechanisms to maintain these programs. And that's a real issue. So land use money, collaborations, all of these projects take the county working with the city, with the service provider, with the state, with the law enforcement. And I'm in a lot of those rooms, and I love all those partners, and they drive me nuts at the same time, because it's just hard to, when you're doing something complicated, it's complicated. And there are complicated egos and emotions and thoughts and approaches and political perspectives, and it's hard to navigate that. And then the last one, of course, is NIMBYism. Just the idea that I love sheltering and I want to help unhoused people, but not in my backyard. And we've had a couple projects go south over that. And so if we can solve land use, if we can find money, if we can deal with NIMBYism, and we can work collaboratively across agencies, we'll have this whipped out by Christmas, I'm pretty sure.
But I also just wanted to touch on that Chris, I think, spoke well to this idea of NIMBYism, because that's a natural response that people are going to have, especially when they don't know what's going on next door. But what I heard from your comments was just, we're working with partner agencies. If it's not a good match, we ask them to leave there. People are go back to the woods, for lack of another place to be. But we don't ignore their humanity, and we don't not give people a chance, right?
And we invited our neighbors the one neighbor who has had an issue
Right,
became part of the solution.
right,
He was excited to be asked.
right. Which kind of gets at Donna's comment
Was a
too, I
surprise
would
to him.
say, about like sometimes when you get engaged, you find out things that you might not have discovered, in your own heart. Sir?
Yeah, I guess the comment came up that in Portland they spent all this money, the situation is worse than it was. And to me that just means that no matter how many people they get out of the problem, there are more people falling into homelessness.
Yes.
So could somebody speak to catching people before they're falling into homelessness, or these people come from somewhere.
Right. I think of the homeless as messengers of broken systems. And we need to understand which systems are broken and need our attention, need our support, need our funding, need our votes, honestly, need our votes, if nothing else. And Cassie's got 3 books up here, 2 of which I've read and one I'm looking forward to reading. And I encourage you to read about the systemic aspect of poverty, which is why we see an increasing population of people pushed out of homes and housing and safe spaces, and we have no place to put them back into because they've been priced out of the system. If I read something somewhere, if we could address 80% of these folks with safe, stable housing, we could work with the 20%, and I'm being very broad brushstroke here, that maybe shouldn't be living next door to somebody else, but that's not the majority of the people that you're seeing on the park, alongside the Parkwood and the MH camps. I also want to do a shout out real quickly here to Maggie, because if you haven't picked up the bulletin today, Maggie had a letter to the bulletin that was so elegant and simple, and it was like, these people deserve a place to be that's safe, that maybe has a Santa can or 2, maybe has some fresh water, and just that, maybe a garbage facility. It doesn't take much to create stability, to create what Rocker's talking about, which is dignity, right? And then we have the service providers that can come in and work with them, case by case, individual by individual. So I don't want to talk, but
If I may just, to your point, I want to say that I appreciate your approach to the question, because it isn't often that as service providers we hear someone saying $1 billion was spent and it's worse than it ever was, and then say that tells me that the problem is bigger. Instead, it's usually y'all are just wasting our money. So thank you for the way you phrased that. It is indicative, and I'm not the statistician or the person to throw all those numbers at you, but it is indicative of a problem that has been coming for a very, very long time. It's just more visible because it's so big now. So there's that. Kind of combining these things, I love that you've done such research and looking into other countries and how they're solving the problem. Those solutions really to, Rick's got the 4 things, but those solutions are poised and ready to happen here, exactly the way you've talked about them, in the, looking at different encampments of, managed camps of, managed outdoor shelter is the best thing. Managed outdoor shelters. And from the person who's houseless side of things, if I am houseless and I need to live in a managed outdoor shelter, I'm gonna want to know that it's with kind folks as well. So that is where the dignity comes, if we're able to make those choices, and if we are able to provide choice. And right now it's 5 parking spaces here and 15 there and a congregate shelter. It's way more than we had before, but it certainly isn't what's going to provide solutions. And I would put forth that the crisis almost isn't even here yet. So to your point, many more millions are going to need to be spent. There's much more crisis on the way.
I was
was going to say something very similar than the gentleman behind me. When we talk about planning processes, catching people before they lose their apartment, one of the things I hear from people is that when they call one of the agencies, what they hear is, well, we're already out of money. And so all this money comes in and it goes out. They don't spread it across 12 months. It goes out. And then there's nothing left for people who are going to become homeless if they don't find a way to pay the rent. And it might be a small amount of money. It might be $1,500 or $3,000. So to have that kind of information and planning in the process, I think is super important to have a fund. I sit in a room with a lot of people talking about this, and most of them make 6 figures a year. And so having people who are in poverty at the table, helping with solutions, I think is super important. I think they have a perspective that needs to be heard. And one of the things, because the topic was hope for the future, so one of the things that we did is we actually started a community foundation in Sisters. I live in Bend, but I've worked in Sisters for a very long time. And we started a Sisters Community Foundation, and we provide rental assistance, mortgage assistance. We just helped pay someone's dental bill. We helped with child care assistance and a bereavement camp and veterans, and even done adolescent substance abuse prevention sponsorship, because that helps keep people out of poverty. And as you mentioned, somebody did, there's a lot of shame and embarrassment when it comes to poverty. And it's very hard for someone to say, I am getting kicked out of my house. I had an eviction notice on my door. And I mean, just to, how do we find those people before they end up on the streets is super important. And I did want to know how, of all of your parking places, how many in total in Redmond can you service now?
I think we're at 27 parking spots, and I think we should be close to 35 to 40, I think, before the end of the year. And then that RV park we're working on right now would accommodate for 45 spaces. But we've asked the county to hold the land and reserve if the county owns the land. And it's another 45 acres that would allow for additional phasing. And because it would have utilities at each site, water, sewer, power, it allows the opportunity to bring something like a tiny structure or a park model type RV in and create, with appropriate case management, create something, I hesitate to use the term permanent support housing, but something like that, where you've got folks who are probably never going to make it in dispersed housing, meaning a random apartment in that building or that building. They're going to need to be part of a permanent community and supports around them. So that's
Yeah, the Europeans they're permanent, but people can move in and out.
sure.
You know, a lot of people are just there temporarily because they have
right here now.
that situation.
Okay, we've got one more question right here.
Counselor, did you want to offer anything? No. Okay.
So I wanted to go back on the civic engagement. I felt through the 4 different discussions that we've had that the lack of sense of community, or there's a disconnect between what people hear and feel and learn about. And I like what you said about getting the information from an educated experts that will give the input. And I really, somehow what you said about the jury duty for it really clicked, because I felt if we do not make it mandatory, we are at a point where there is such a disconnect between the poles that I don't know how to make it happen. So I would like to hear a little bit more about what the jury duty would be like, and is it even feasible?
So this is a bit, I mean, we're very early in this process. We have one conference with an international scholar on civic assemblies come, and it was wonderful. I think I could go on about this all night, but I won't. So, I mean, there's 3 really key things. One, it creates additional experts. So if you invite 60 or 100 people in, it's a lot like volunteering in the kitchen. You immediately, you're not an expert. I've been there countless times, and I do not consider myself an expert in homelessness, but or food insecurity. But once somebody has spent time educating themselves and learning about the problem, they will then go out and be a messenger in the community for, hey, this is a housing problem. This is not a Measure 110 problem. This is not, or it's not purely one thing. These are complicated situations. So that's one thing. The other is I believe in democracy, and I believe we get to better policy when there's more voices involved, particularly people who have experienced homelessness or are experiencing homelessness being part of the solutions. And then also, we have a real problem and I think this is in our country and probably internationally, of the same people showing up to civic engagement. It is typically people who can afford to. It's typically older people. And God love older people, you are going to save us from making the mistakes that young people are making. But it is typically white people. And it's typically, that's why we see so much NIMBYism in these processes. And it's not a criticism of who's showing up. It's a criticism of systems essentially preventing people who are experiencing homelessness, people with kids, from showing up and being able to participate. Civic assemblies may be one tool to alleviate some of that. But we have a ways to go.
So we have about 10 minutes, so let's try and squeeze in a couple more questions.
So can you tell me how much subsidized housing you have in Bend? Does anybody know?
So how much deed restricted, affordable? I mean, there's so many different types of capital A affordable. I don't know the number of units for deed restricted. I do know that we've developed more in the past millennium than in the history of Bend.
I'm asking because I had a friend who lived with me for about a year and a half because she simply couldn't afford rent in Bend. And she had her name in, I don't know, some kind of weird lottery. I don't know, I really honestly don't understand it. Yeah. You know, there's some kind of lottery that you put your name in, and you know, maybe it'll take 2 years or maybe never, you know, that she'll be able to get housing. Luckily, she was able to find another place to live because, like, my house is really little, and I kind of wanted it back. But I was, you know, I'm just like, what do people do?
You know, hit the nail on the head in terms of homelessness.
It's just so, to me, it's like so sad that people who are working their whole life and they can't afford. I mean, if I didn't buy my house in 1980, I'd probably be homeless. You know, because now I'm retired. Luckily, I'm okay. But you know, I mean, you know, what do people do at the end of their life when they don't have enough Social Security to be able to live? That to me is very sad, and I wish that we could have more subsidized housing. You know, maybe we need to, like, you know, write letters to the federal government. I have no idea, but I'm just saying we need something like that. You know, some more subsidized housing. I think for people that just can't afford it, even though they're working, or they have worked their whole life and they're on Social Security and they don't have enough to get by on.
So, Donna, I mean, maybe we can kind of go back to our last conversation and the one before that, which are on YouTube, by the way. But talking about, there was a point made that it's not in the interest of the people building the housing to make it affordable for several reasons. The cost of goods, the cost of the land, and that unfortunately we live in a capitalist society and they're there to make money. So
that's why we have a federal government, though.
You are correct, but they have lobbyists too, and that was one of the things that came up a lot of times with they're going to lobby for building and construction companies over a single person. I mean, talk about that, please.
So I think rather than focusing on, you know, the capitalism, which is definitely a factor, the key to the homelessness crisis is abundant housing. Yeah. It is not just more deed restricted affordable housing, which we do need more, but we're doing pretty well at the city. It's more market rate housing. It's more multifamily housing, which we've broken more records this month. Unfortunately, we also see our average median home price go to $800,000 for the first time ever.
Median, yeah.
But I want to, to me, it's the most useful way of talking about how are we going to solve homelessness is abundant housing, and that's more different types of housing of every kind. And a lot of that has to be deed restricted, but some of it just needs to be low working family middle housing.
Or if anybody wants to figure out how to devalue land, I'm all for that one.
Yeah.
Well, my name is Chuck Hemingway. I'm a service provider, as I say. I'm also on the board of Central Oregon Villages, and it wouldn't exist if it weren't for the support of people like Anthony and folks on the council. So that's incredible what the city did there. Anthony mentioned that there was opposition. Ruth was the one that put together the facilitation with the neighborhood that brought the neighborhoods together to allow us to engage in a conversation that led to the okay in Larkspur to create the village. And Anthony talked about, that's going to business opposition. I was there the other day, and there was a lady pulling a wagon out of the front gate, and I thought, initially, maybe that's one of the residents. And it turned out to be a lady from the hotel who was now bringing over some supplies that were being donated, and they were one of the ones that were the first big opponents of it. And so now they're engaging in being a part of our community. And the whole idea is the idea of, we don't call it a managed camp. It's a village, and what we're about is building community. Not just within the people that live there, but within the businesses and the folks that live in the neighborhood. And we've had our first success. We graduated one young lady into permanent housing. Of the residents who are there right now, there are 7. 6 are women who have been sexually abused or victims of domestic violence and are coming out of tents in China Camp, China Hat, or living in their cars. We have one man who is terminally ill with renal failure, and he only has a couple of months left to live. But he has been living in his car and at the Second Street shelter. But now he's got a comfortable, safe, secure place to live. It's air conditioned, and he can have regular meals and such. So this model works, but it needs the support of a community and ideas that I would have to suggest. Somebody mentioned next door. Well, I'm on next door, and what I make it a point of doing is when I see those incorrect assertions, I nicely respond back to them and recite the real facts. And I've recited several times the information from the point in time count about to comments about, well, these people they just come here to get drugs because there's a 110. And I point out the statistics from the point in time count. And I point out other statistics from around the country about how efforts have succeeded under Housing First to end homelessness. So I would say, go on next door, watch the comments, and as a member of the community, step in and provide the accurate information. If you don't respond, you just let it sit there, that's going to be accepted as fact by all those people out there. If we can start building a model of people responding and providing the correct information, I think it's going to go a long way to helping us get rid of these myths that people are continuing to perpetuate out there. The other suggestion I've got concerns funding. Anthony said, we're going to be running out of funding in 3 years to run Central Oregon Villages and some of these other locations. So I would hope to see that our community would support the transfer of the Coordinated Housing Office to COIC. And as a part of that process, that COIC could begin some legislative initiative right now for sustainable funding. When they started the bus program back here in Bend, how are we going to keep it running? Well, with COIC, there's been some legislation passed that provides funding for that. City of Bend has an affordable housing fund. There's some limitations on being able to expand that, but as part of the Coordinated Houses Office being transferred to COIC, I would suggest that they can begin an initiative among the jurisdictions to create some way to have sustainable funding so that when 3 years comes, there's a way to continue supporting these efforts. But it's got to start now. The legislature just did it. There's going to be another 2 years, and we've got to identify what are the barriers in the legislature and what are the steps we can take among the jurisdictions that make up the Coordinated Houses Office to work together to make this happen. Sorry to go so long here.
Thank you, Jeff, very much. Thank you for being so engaged also with it.
Say what COIC is.
Did you want to speak to COIC?
Just say what it is.
Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council is a multi-jurisdictional agency that has agreed to take on the responsibilities for coordinating the services to the unhoused, in all facets, from Deschutes County, which seems like a more appropriate place for it to live, since it is a regional issue. Rick, did you want to?
Yeah.
And then we're going to let you go.
Yeah, well, I was trying to think of, I think hope and not despair is what I hope you leave with. It's not that this is so complex that we'll never be able to solve this land use and yeah, they're big problems, but there are things you can do. And this is just kind of off the top of my head. I appreciate Chuck in the work he does. Maybe your calling is to be a next door culture warrior. God help that site. Maybe your job is to shut next door down as the caustic cesspool that it is online, or for that matter, the KDZ comments. But if you want to go fight your battles there, I'll take all the help I can get. I love the YIMBY group that exists in Bend. I don't know if you're familiar with the YIMBY group. That is a group, and I found them on Facebook, and and
what does YIMBY mean?
yes, in my backyard, which they advocate not just for issues on homelessness, but all sorts of housing. Right? If we've got garden hills with all kinds of kinks in it, we got to build more multifamily and more single family and more all the housing. City and county funding. We need advocates there. Ordinances, smart ordinances, and not dumb ordinances. I will be happy to share with you the letter to the editor that I helped write opposing the sheriff's proposed ordinance. I thought it was, in a word, dumb. Now, there are smart ordinances, and I'm not saying that there isn't a place for enforcement. Enforcement follows opportunity for people to move up. So there are places to volunteer and give. There are places to have hope. If you know parking lots, I want to hear about them. If you own a parking lot, I want to talk to you. There are ways that you can engage, and we can solve this at the local level.
I kind of wanted to add one more thing to Donna's volunteerism, just because I guess we technically work together now with the Family Kitchen. So I volunteer for a group out in Redmond called Redmond Collective Action. Sundays we go out and feed the houseless. I do that when I'm not working here, but we've had a lot of issues because, well, and I used to cook a bunch of the meals. We had hotel pans. My house smelled great. But we have to go from Redmond to Bend to Family Kitchen to pick it up and then bring it back out to Redmond and then bring the pans back out. So, I'm just saying, if there were extra people from Bend who had a Sunday morning free, don't forget Redmond, don't forget Sisters, Lapine, Culver. Like, we've talked in these a lot. It feels sometimes like we focus on Bend because it maybe is a little bit more visible, and there is some division between Bend and Redmond. That don't Bend My Redmond is an actual Facebook group. I hate it, but there's great things happening in Redmond and Bend, and so if you look at this volunteerism and you say, well, I don't have maybe all of that time, or I can't show up when they're feeding people, but can you make something at home? Like, I have a knitting loom and I whip out hats and then I just drop them off because that's what I do when I binge Netflix and it makes me feel better. You know, so because a lot of times you will come into the, like, my schedule doesn't fit with what I would like to be volunteering to do. There is so much on the back end that you can be doing that nobody sees and will still help a ton.
Thank you, Judith. I think that's one of the big themes that's emerged tonight. You know, we have macro level systems change that I think we could all benefit from continuous, education and information to inform us in our opinions, and again, resources right here for you to start with. There's small moves each of us can make, from knitting hats. I love what you're doing up in Sisters. I think that is an inspiring model that we should, replicate in every neighborhood, every corner of this region. You guys are champions. You're leading the charge, leading the region in this effort. And
Can I say one more thing?
yeah.
So some of the thing that I would ask of everybody is to hold us as electeds accountable. And that doesn't mean I think you should come to every city council meeting and yell. Sometimes I'm sad, sometimes I'm angry. But you are all very educated members of this community. It's really important for city councilors and county commissioners and other city councilors to hear from people who understand the problem and have an actual solution, not just, this isn't working, fix it, solve human suffering. That is not the work of government, unfortunately. So my request to you is to lean into the civic engagement that I've tried to touch on here tonight. Come to your county commissioner meetings. The public health authority for this city is not the city of Bend. The public health authority for this city is Deschutes County. And we have a public health crisis in this county. So please lean in on civic engagement, hold us accountable, make sure we know what's happening to you and your neighbors, whether they're experiencing homelessness.
So, I hope we're ending where we began, which is gratitude. Really, gratitude for all that's being done, all that's being imagined, all that's possible. This is our place and these are our people. And thank you for being engaged yourselves and being curious and being here tonight. I wanted to just share that we get to, many of us are not going to know the results of our good work. And that's going to have to be okay. But one sweet hat, one dignified glance, one parking space, one meal, one step at a time, one letter to the editor, it all weaves together. One small village that works, and it becomes the way we do things in this town. And I think we can make a difference, we can make a dent in the crises of our unhoused community. So thank you for your curiosity, your compassion,